Vanessa George lived in a mansion hidden behind tall gates in the heart of Victoria Island, Lagos, a place where luxury breathed in every corner, yet warmth rarely stayed, because she was the only daughter of Chief Edward George, a powerful hotel magnate whose name commanded respect across Nigeria's elite. And from childhood, Vanessa had been surrounded by wealth, designer clothes, private schools, and staff who bowed before her presence, but never by people who truly knew her. As her days were filled with photo shoots, brunches, expensive vacations, and perfectly curated social media posts that showed a life of ease while hiding a heart heavy with loneliness. And although people admired her beauty, elegance, and status, very few saw the quiet sadness behind her confident smile. The sadness of growing up in rooms too big for genuine laughter and relationships built more on benefits than bonds. Until one hot Monday morning when she stepped out of the mansion wearing a silk burgundy dress and diamond-studded sandals, expecting her usual driver only to be told he would not be coming, which irritated her already restless mood. And as she questioned the delay, a black Toyota Camry rolled carefully into the compound, moving with the caution of someone who knew he did not belong among such luxury. And from the car stepped out a young man with calm eyes, dark skin, and a composed posture, dressed simply in a sky-blue shirt and black trousers, holding a small file in his hand, introducing himself politely as Daniel, the new driver. And though Vanessa initially dismissed him as just another staff member, something about his quiet confidence unsettled her assumptions. Because, unlike others, he did not stare at her beauty or tremble under her status. He simply did his job with dignity, driving smoothly through Lagos traffic without rushing or showing off. And as the city buzzed around them, Vanessa found herself watching his reflection in the glass, sensing an unfamiliar feeling of safety she had never purchased with money, a feeling that confused her because it came from someone she had been taught to overlook. And later that day, when her aggressive ex-boyfriend confronted her publicly and grabbed her arm, it was Daniel who stepped forward calmly, defending her without insults or violence, reminding her for the first time what quiet strength looked like. And though she brushed it off with pride, something inside her shifted, unaware that this ordinary man had just entered her life to challenge everything she believed about power, class, and worth, planting the first seed of a story that would soon test her pride, reshape her destiny, and reveal that sometimes the people we least expect carry the greatest impact on our lives. Daniel, I understood from his very first day at the George residence that survival in a world of power required humility more than talent. And so he spoke little, moved carefully, and treated every task with discipline shaped by years of struggle, opening doors silently, adjusting mirrors before being asked, and driving through Lagos traffic with patience rather than pride. While Vanessa at first barely noticed him beyond his usefulness, yet days turned into weeks, and his consistency began to stand out against the noise of her privileged life. Because Daniel never invaded her space with unnecessary conversation, nor tried to impress her with false confidence. And gradually, during long hours in traffic, she began to ask questions, discovering he had once studied accounting at the University of Lagos before his father's death forced him to abandon dreams and carry responsibility for younger siblings. A story that surprised her because it did not match the narrow image she had of drivers. And though she masked her curiosity with casual indifference, she found herself respecting the way he spoke, choosing words carefully, never complaining about his fate. And when rain poured unexpectedly one evening, and he shielded her from getting soaked while carrying her groceries, something inside her softened, because no man in her circle had ever done something so ordinary with such sincerity. And their conversations slowly grew warmer, laughter slipping into moments once ruled by silence, until the night she returned from a glamorous party broken by betrayal, sitting in the back seat, unable to hide her tears after discovering her fiancé's infidelity. And Daniel said little, turning off the engine and allowing her pain to breathe without judgment, offering comfort through presence rather than advice. And when she confessed how often men accused her of being too strong, too loud, too opinionated, his gentle response cut deeper than sympathy, reminding her that perhaps she had simply been too much for the wrong people. Words that stayed with her long after the car was parked. Yet not everyone welcomed this growing closeness, because Mrs. George noticed Vanessa laughing freely in the parked car and planted concern in Chief Edward's mind, who summoned his daughter and reminded her sharply that Daniel was only staff, a commoner who should never be mistaken for a companion, drawing a line between class and connection that Vanessa felt but could not cross. And though she argued weakly, her father's final warning echoed louder than her heart, forcing her into a choice she was not brave enough to fight. And the next morning she dismissed Daniel with forced composure, unable to meet his eyes as he accepted the decision without anger, thanking her for kindness and silence before walking away with dignity that haunted her more than any argument could have, leaving behind a hollow space she could not explain, unaware that by protecting her comfort she had just wounded the one man who saw her without fear or expectation. 3 weeks after Daniel left the George residence, Vanessa realized how fragile comfort truly was, because the silence he left behind was louder than the luxury surrounding her, and the new driver her father hired filled every ride with noise, rudeness, and careless behavior that reminded her daily of what respect had once felt like. Yet pride kept her from reaching for Daniel's number as nights grew longer and her thoughts heavier. While elsewhere, Daniel had moved into a cramped one-room apartment in Cerrillar, with nothing but a mattress, a second-hand laptop, and determination, choosing hardship over humiliation, and using his savings to buy a used bike that became the foundation of his delivery hustle, riding across Lagos with sweat-soaked shirts and aching muscles as he carried food, clothes, wigs, and electronics for customers who barely noticed him. But Daniel noticed everything, learning streets, people, and discipline, pushing himself daily because failure was not an option when siblings depended on him. And one evening, a satisfied customer handed him a business card that led to an investor who believed in his consistency, giving him capital that transformed his hustle into a growing business, while Vanessa's world crumbled rapidly when her father forced her into an engagement with Olamide, a wealthy politician's son whose charm was loud and shallow. And though her heart resisted, she surrendered to pressure, only for humiliation to strike publicly when EFCC agents stormed her engagement party and arrested her fiancé for fraud, dragging him away before cameras, guests, and gossip, turning her tears into viral headlines and her family's name into mockery. and in a single night her social circle vanished. Her father's anger turned toward her, and the admiration she once enjoyed dissolved into judgment, leaving her isolated in a mansion that now felt colder than ever. While Daniel's progress accelerated quietly as he hired riders, expanded routes, and secured contracts, moving with patience instead of pride, proving that rejection had sharpened rather than broken him. And as months passed, Vanessa watched her father's empire weaken, investors withdrawing, salaries unpaid, hotels struggling under debt, while she took a modest role in the remaining branch, learning humility through necessity, discovering how invisible privilege becomes once power fades. And though 2 years passed, the ache of losing Daniel never softened, only matured into regret as she wondered how easily she had chosen comfort over courage, unaware that destiny was circling back with consequences neither of them could escape, preparing a reunion shaped not by romance but by reckoning, where pride would be stripped, growth would be tested, and the truth about worth would finally stand exposed. 2 years after Daniel, I was dismissed as nothing more than a driver. His return to the world that once rejected him came quietly, without announcements or celebration, as he walked into corporate meetings with calm authority, no longer dressed in faded shirts but tailored suits earned through discipline, while his company, Danny Fast Group, expanded beyond deliveries into logistics and supply chains for major construction and hospitality firms, gaining a reputation built on reliability rather than noise. And one ordinary morning, a white envelope landed on his desk carrying an offer that froze his thoughts, because the hotel empire, owned by Chief Edward George, was drowning in debt, crushed by unpaid salaries, investor withdrawals, and looming bank seizures. And Daniel sat silently, remembering the day he was sent away with dignity but no defense, the words, "He is just staff," echoing in his mind. Yet instead of revenge, he saw opportunity, choosing restoration over resentment. And within weeks, the acquisition was complete, debts cleared, staff stabilized, and ownership transferred, while Vanessa, stripped of privilege and relevance, learned of the sale through trembling hands and disbelief, stepping into the rebranding ceremony with fear heavy in her chest, only to hear the name Daniel I announced as the new CEO, a moment that shattered her composure as reality struck with brutal clarity, because the man she once dismissed now stood where her family once ruled. And though Daniel spoke of rebuilding and vision, his eyes never searched for her, forcing Vanessa to face the weight of her choices in silence. And when she later worked under the new management, he neither favored nor punished her, treating her like any other employee, which hurt more than anger ever could, because invisibility taught humility faster than disgrace. And as months passed, Vanessa worked diligently, shedding entitlement, learning respect from the ground up, while Daniel observed quietly, noticing her discipline, restraint, and growth without acknowledging the past. Until one day she was summoned to his office, heart racing as she sat before the man whose life had once revolved around her convenience, only to receive a promotion based purely on merit, not pity. And when she asked if he still hated her, his calm response revealed healing rather than bitterness, admitting that pain had been buried, not erased. And as Vanessa left the office with tears held back by pride, Daniel sat alone, questioning whether power had truly protected his heart or merely masked its scars. Realizing that success had restored his dignity but not fully healed the wound pride once carved. And in that silence, both understood that life had reversed their positions, not to punish or reward, but to teach, exposing the illusion of status and the permanence of character. As destiny continued weaving a lesson neither could escape, proving that the true measure of a person is not who they command, but who they remain when power finally arrives. Healing did not arrive in dramatic apologies or sudden forgiveness for either Daniel or Vanessa, but through long days of quiet effort and unspoken restraint, because after the acquisition, Daniel chose distance instead of confrontation, believing time was safer than emotion, while Vanessa learned humility the hard way by earning respect through work rather than entitlement, arriving early, leaving late, and absorbing corrections without complaint, slowly shedding the arrogance that once defined her. And although Daniel never spoke to her beyond professional necessity, he noticed the change in her posture, her patience with junior staff, and the way she no longer demanded attention, realizing growth had replaced pride. Yet scars do not vanish simply because lessons are learned, and Daniel still carried memories of being dismissed, of standing quietly while class lines erased his humanity, memories that success could not fully silence. And one rainy afternoon those memories were tested when a soaked young man named Musa appeared at the hotel reception, poor, shaking, and desperate, a forgotten neighbor from Daniel's lowest days and as security moved to escort him out, Daniel stepped forward, recognizing the man who once shared his last money during illness, choosing compassion without hesitation, hugging him publicly, and offering employment without shame, a moment that revealed Daniel's true character to everyone watching, including Vanessa, whose tears fell not from jealousy but realization, because she finally understood the depth of the heart she once rejected. And that night she accepted a truth she had avoided for years, that she had not lost Daniel to class, but to fear and pride. And days later, when she was summoned to Daniel's office once more, the atmosphere carried less tension and more honesty, as he acknowledged her dedication and promoted her based on performance, not history, forcing her to confront a question she could no longer avoid, asking whether he still hated her. And Daniel answered with quiet clarity, admitting that hatred had never lived there, only pain buried beneath survival. And as Vanessa apologized without excuses, accepting responsibility for her silence and choices, Daniel listened without interruption, understanding that forgiveness is not an event but a process. And when she left his office that day, something shifted between them, not romance, but respect, reclaimed through accountability. And as weeks passed, their interactions softened. Brief acknowledgments replacing distance, professionalism layered with humanity, while Daniel continued to expand his philanthropic efforts, investing in people, rebuilding lives, and choosing generosity as resistance against the bitterness that once threatened him. And Vanessa observed this transformation with humility, learning that true power does not announce itself, it reveals itself through action. And although their past could not be rewritten, healing slowly rewrote their present, proving that growth often demands discomfort, that pride delays healing, and that forgiveness, when earned rather than demanded, becomes the most powerful form of restoration. setting the stage for a future neither had imagined, where pain would no longer dictate identity and dignity would finally outweigh status. The evening Daniel finally asked Vanessa to talk arrived quietly, without ceremony, yet it carried the weight of years of silence, regret, and unspoken truth. As they sat on the rooftop of the hotel, overlooking Lagos lights that shimmered like distant promises, and for the first time neither of them hid behind titles, pride, or history. Because Vanessa spoke with trembling honesty, admitting that her confidence had once been arrogance, that fear of disappointing her father had cost her the courage to stand up for the man who treated her with dignity, and that losing everything had taught her the value of humility. While Daniel listened without interruption, absorbing words that once would have broken him but now simply revealed how far both of them had come. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried no anger, only clarity, confessing that rejection had once fueled him, pushed him to build a life where no one could belittle his worth again. Yet success had not erased the pain, it had only buried it under responsibility and discipline. And as the city wind moved between them, he admitted that forgiveness was never about forgetting, but about choosing not to let the past dictate the future, explaining that he had needed time to heal in silence, to become a man who could face her without resentment or desire for validation. And Vanessa listened with tears she no longer tried to hide, understanding that healing demanded patience rather than entitlement. And when she asked if there was still love between them, Daniel paused, not out of confusion but honesty, explaining that love changes shape with experience, sometimes returning as romance, and sometimes as respect, partnership, and understanding. And that whatever stood between them now had to grow naturally, not as a reward for regret or a cure for loneliness. And as the night deepened, they shared memories without bitterness, laughter replacing pain, acknowledging the people they had been and the people they had become, realizing that growth had not erased their past but had softened its edges. And when they finally stood to leave, there were no promises exchanged, no dramatic embraces, just a quiet understanding that life had given them a second chance, not to relive what was lost, but to redefine what was possible. And in that moment, both accepted that maturity does not always bring fairy tale endings, but it offers something far more powerful: peace, respect, and the freedom to choose wisely. And as they walked back into the building side by side, not as boss and employee or rich girl and driver, but as two adults shaped by failure and resilience, they carried with them a truth neither had known before, that love is not proven by possession or status, but by growth, accountability, and the courage to face one another without masks. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: the story between Daniel and Vanessa was no longer driven by pride or pain, but by understanding earned through time, making whatever came next real, honest, and finally free. 1 year later, Daniel I and Vanessa George stood not as they once had, one powerful, one entitled, but as equals, partners in a business that had grown from a single delivery bike into a full logistics and hospitality empire that now bore Daniel's name. And the transformation had not come from luck or inheritance, but from endurance, humility, and the quiet courage to act when opportunity demanded it. Because Daniel had used every setback as fuel, from being dismissed as a mere driver to building a company that restored dignity to those overlooked, while Vanessa had learned to shed entitlement, work without recognition, and see value in effort rather than status. And together they had rewritten their story into one defined not by wealth or position, but by perseverance, respect, and shared vision. A reality that was never sweeter than the day they walked through the newly rebranded hotel lobby, greeted by staff who now knew them both for their character rather than their past. And when Vanessa paused to watch Daniel interact with employees, vendors, and even former neighbors from Surler, she realized that the man she had once dismissed as ordinary had become the architect of a future she could have never imagined, and that life's lessons were cruel yet precise, because the very pride that had once separated them now served as the backdrop to their growth, teaching that people must be judged not by current status but by heart, integrity, and persistence. And as they stood in front of the polished glass doors emblazoned with the Danny Locke logo, city lights reflecting their journey, they felt the quiet power of shared purpose, understanding that forgiveness and respect could coexist without romantic closure, and that love sometimes returns not as passion but as partnership, guiding hands, and mutual admiration. And as the sun rose over Lagos, highlighting the horizon of skyscrapers and bustling streets, Vanessa and Daniel exchanged a look that acknowledged every trial, every tear, every lesson, and every triumph. And in that silent acknowledgement, they knew that life had granted them more than success. It had given them the wisdom to recognize that the one who drives your past may also drive your future, that timing is everything, and that destiny, though delayed, always arrives with precision, and that the girl who once ruled her world with pride now walked alongside the man who built his with purpose, not as lovers, but as equals, teachers, and survivors, proving that true greatness lies not in fortune, but in character, and that sometimes the person society deems just a driver is in fact the one who carries the steering wheel of destiny itself.